A dream honeymoon turned into a nightmare. One woman's final days were filled with smiles, secrets, and a deadly betrayal. What really happened behind closed doors on the perfect getaway could shock you to your core. Isabella Hellmann's wedding appeared flawless to everyone watching. The venue was elegant, the guests were smiling, and Isabella herself looked calm and confident. She was known among friends as organized and cautious, someone who rarely made impulsive decisions. Her choice to marry quickly surprised a few people, yet she seemed certain it was the right step. In the weeks before the ceremony, she tied up loose ends in her life. She sold her apartment, closed old accounts, and simplified her belongings. These actions looked practical, like preparation for a fresh start. No one questioned them deeply. The marriage was presented as a promise of stability and happiness. Photos shared afterward showed warm expressions and carefully framed moments. The couple planned a private honeymoon far from crowds, choosing isolation over luxury. The destination was described as peaceful and untouched, a place meant for rest and connection. Isabella told relatives she needed time away from noise and pressure. They believed she was finally slowing down. What remained unseen were subtle changes. Isabella had adjusted her will shortly before the wedding. She also took out new insurance policies, explaining them as responsible planning. These decisions felt mature, not alarming. Family members focused on celebration, not warning signs. As the couple departed for their honeymoon, there was relief that the busy months were finished. Everyone believed the hardest parts were behind her. No one imagined the journey marked the beginning of something far darker, where preparation and trust would soon take on a terrifying meaning. The future seemed settled, predictable, and safe, wrapped in routine expectations that masked risks quietly forming beneath the surface of what looked like love and lifelong commitment forever promised. The honeymoon destination was chosen for its isolation and silence. The resort sat between dense forest and a cold, restless sea, far from busy roads or nearby towns. It was marketed as a place where couples could disappear for a while. Phone signals were unreliable, and internet access was limited. For most guests, this was part of the charm. For investigators later, it became a concern. The couple arrived in the evening as light rain fell. Staff recalled nothing unusual, only that Isabella looked exhausted after the long journey. Over the next 2 days, the pair kept to themselves. They skipped scheduled activities and canceled guided tours without explanation. Meals were ordered to the room, and the privacy sign remained on the door. Other guests barely noticed them. The weather worsened, bringing strong winds and heavy rain. Boat transport was suspended, and roads became difficult to use. The resort felt cut off from the world. Silence filled the halls. Staff grew uneasy when the room showed no movement by the third morning. Breakfast trays were untouched outside the door. Phone calls went unanswered. At first, workers assumed the couple wanted to be left alone. By midday, concern replaced patience. Resort policy required a welfare check. When no response came, management decided to enter. The calm atmosphere quickly shifted. What was meant to be a peaceful escape now felt tense and unsettling. The isolation that promised romance had turned into a barrier, delaying help and hiding whatever had happened inside the room. The honeymoon location, once advertised as a dream retreat, had quietly become the setting for something deeply wrong, shaped by distance, silence, and the absence of witnesses or immediate answers. Resort staff finally unlocked the door after repeated attempts to make contact failed. The room was quiet, curtains drawn, air heavy and still. Isabella was found on the floor beside the bed, unmoving. There were no signs of a struggle. Furniture was in place, luggage neatly packed, personal items untouched. The scene did not match what staff expected after days of silence. Panic spread quickly through the resort. Emergency services were contacted, but the storm delayed their arrival. When help reached the location, Isabella was pronounced dead. Her husband was nearby, physically unharmed but disoriented. He appeared confused and claimed not to understand what had happened. Authorities secured the room and restricted access to the area. Guests were asked to remain inside their rooms. The resort's calm image vanished within hours. Initial checks revealed no forced entry and no obvious injuries. Valuables were still present, ruling out robbery. The lack of visible wounds led some to believe the death might have been sudden or medical. Still, the setting raised questions. The isolation meant no witnesses and limited timelines. Investigators noted the unusual delay before help was called. As news spread, rumors began forming among staff and guests. Some whispered about an accident. Others suspected illness worsened by stress. The truth was unclear, but unease filled the air. What was certain was that a honeymoon had ended in death. The quiet resort, once chosen for peace and privacy, was now sealed off, marked by flashing lights and unanswered questions that would soon lead far beyond this remote shoreline. Those questions lingered as authorities prepared their reports, unaware this discovery would trigger an investigation far more complex and disturbing in coming days. Investigators began with the simplest explanation. Sudden death during travel can happen, especially after stress and exhaustion. Isabella had no visible injuries, no signs of violence, and no history of serious illness. Her husband described a confusing morning and claimed panic prevented him from acting sooner. Without witnesses or evidence of a struggle, the situation appeared tragic but straightforward. Early reports leaned toward natural causes. Isabella's family was informed quickly. Shock and grief overwhelmed them, leaving little room for doubt. They trusted the authorities and accepted the initial theory. Arrangements were discussed, and plans were made to return Isabella home. The resort cooperated fully, providing access logs and staff statements. Everything seemed routine, almost too orderly. However, small details began to disturb investigators. Time estimates did not fully align. The delay in calling for help stood out, even considering the isolation. Staff noted that the room had remained undisturbed longer than expected. One medical responder noticed a faint mark on Isabella's neck. It was small, easy to overlook, and not clearly linked to injury. Still, it did not fit a sudden collapse. This observation was added quietly to the report. It was not enough to change conclusions, but it created uncertainty. Investigators requested a full autopsy instead of a basic examination. This decision slowed the process and frustrated those wanting quick closure. The early assumption of natural death began to weaken. While nothing openly pointed to violence, the absence of clear answers became troubling. The calm surface of the case concealed unanswered questions. What initially seemed like an unfortunate medical event now carried the weight of possibility, suggesting that the truth might be far more complicated than first believed. The autopsy results shattered the early conclusions and redirected the entire investigation. Medical examiners found no signs of natural failure that could explain Isabella's sudden death. Instead, toxic substances were detected in her system. The poison was slow-acting and carefully measured, designed to weaken the body over time rather than cause immediate collapse. It explained her reported fatigue and confusion during the final days of the honeymoon. The substance disrupted vital functions quietly, allowing death to appear sudden and unexplained. This discovery confirmed that Isabella had been murdered. There were no needle marks or visible wounds, ruling out forced administration. The poison had entered her body gradually, likely through something she consumed willingly. Investigators understood immediately what this meant. The method relied on trust and access, not violence. Whoever delivered it needed time, patience, and close proximity. Attention returned to the honeymoon room. Every item was re-examined. Glassware, food containers, water bottles, and personal products were collected for testing. Staff meal records were reviewed. Nothing pointed to contamination outside the room. The setting that once suggested privacy now suggested control. The isolation limited outside interference and delayed suspicion. Authorities informed Isabella's family of the findings. Their grief turned into disbelief and anger. The idea that someone close had poisoned her slowly was difficult to accept. The honeymoon, once seen as a celebration, was now viewed as part of a calculated plan. Investigators shifted their focus toward motive. This was not impulsive or emotional. The poison required planning and research. Someone had expected this outcome. The case moved from uncertainty to intent, and the question was no longer how Isabella died, but why someone wanted her life to end so quietly and without immediate detection. Investigators began examining Isabella's life beyond the honeymoon. Financial records revealed changes that suddenly carried new meaning. Large insurance policies had been taken out only weeks before the wedding. Isabella had listed her husband as the sole beneficiary. At the time, these choices seemed practical, even responsible. Now they suggested preparation. Bank statements also showed Isabella had transferred savings into shared accounts shortly before the marriage, giving her husband full access. Emails and personal notes painted a quieter picture of doubt. Isabella had questioned the speed of the relationship, but never voiced serious concern to family. She appeared determined to make the marriage work, believing commitment would bring stability. Friends later recalled moments of hesitation, quickly dismissed as stress. Investigators saw these as warning signs ignored. Attention then shifted to her husband's background. Records revealed long-standing financial trouble hidden behind a polished image. There were unpaid debts, failed business attempts, and sudden expenses with no clear explanation. The marriage offered a solution to these problems. Insurance payouts and shared assets could erase years of difficulty. The honeymoon timeline was reviewed again. The poisoning required repeated access and careful control. This aligned with someone sharing meals and private space daily. Investigators noted how the resort's isolation removed witnesses and reduced emergency response time. The location choice no longer seemed romantic, but strategic. Each finding added weight to a growing theory. The marriage itself appeared less like a partnership and more like a step in a plan. Isabella's trust, routines, and desire for stability had been used against her. The investigation now centered on whether love had been genuine or merely a tool, and whether the honeymoon marked celebration or execution. The investigation next focused on identifying the poison itself. Laboratory analysis confirmed it was a rare substance not commonly used in crimes. Its effects were subtle, producing weakness, confusion, and gradual organ failure. Detecting it required advanced testing, which explained why early examinations missed it. Investigators traced how such a substance could be obtained. Records showed it was available only through specialized suppliers, often for research purposes. A breakthrough came when analysts uncovered an online purchase made months before the wedding. The order had been placed under a false name, but digital footprints told a different story. The device used, the timing, and the delivery location all connected back to Isabella's husband. The package had been shipped to an address linked to him, not the couple's shared home. This detail suggested secrecy and intent. Further examination of internet activity revealed extensive research. Searches included information about undetectable poisons, delayed symptoms, and substances that mimic natural illness. The timeline of these searches aligned closely with key moments in the relationship, including the engagement and honeymoon planning. Investigators concluded the method was chosen specifically to avoid suspicion. The poison required multiple small doses to be effective. This explained why Isabella's decline appeared gradual and why she never raised alarm. Each dose blended into routine meals and drinks. Trust made the method possible. This evidence eliminated any remaining doubt about planning. The murder was not sudden or accidental. It unfolded slowly, hidden within daily life. What looked like a peaceful honeymoon was, in reality, the final stage of a carefully constructed plan designed to end a life quietly and without witnesses. As the evidence became stronger, investigators re-examined the husband's statements in detail. His early accounts had seemed confused but believable. When compared against records, inconsistencies began to surface. Phone data showed activity during hours he claimed to be asleep. Messages were sent and deleted within narrow time frames. These actions contradicted his version of events and suggested deliberate control of information. Security cameras at the resort provided further insight. Footage showed him leaving and re-entering the room multiple times during periods he said he never left Isabella's side. Staff logs also revealed requests that did not match his later claims. Small contradictions formed a larger pattern. Each correction he made created new doubt rather than clarity. Investigators noticed another troubling detail. He repeatedly asked about the release of Isabella's body and questioned the need for further testing. His focus appeared fixed on timing rather than grief. He also attempted to contact insurance representatives before official conclusions were reached. These actions were documented carefully. When questioned about the poison, his responses grew vague. He denied knowledge but failed to explain the digital evidence linking him to its purchase. His calm demeanor began to appear rehearsed. Experts noted how emotional responses shifted depending on the audience, suggesting performance rather than shock. The isolation of the resort now seemed deliberate. Emergency delays worked in his favor, reducing chances of intervention. Investigators concluded the setting was chosen to support the method. By this stage, the case no longer relied on circumstantial clues alone. The story he presented was collapsing under verified data. What once appeared as tragic confusion was now understood as calculated deception, slowly exposed by technology, records, and the weight of undeniable facts. Once investigators aligned the financial motive, poison evidence, and digital records, they moved quickly. The case had reached a point where delay could risk interference or escape. Authorities obtained arrest warrants and coordinated with local law enforcement. The husband was taken into custody without resistance. The news spread rapidly through media outlets, transforming the private tragedy into a public case. The arrest shocked many who had followed early reports. The image of a grieving newlywed collapsed under the weight of evidence. Headlines focused on betrayal and planning rather than loss. For Isabella's family, the arrest brought mixed emotions. Relief that the truth was emerging came alongside renewed grief. The idea that someone so close had orchestrated her death was devastating. Investigators presented a detailed timeline outlining the gradual poisoning, the financial preparation, and the strategic choice of location. Each element supported the charge of premeditated murder. Prosecutors emphasized that the crime relied on patience, trust, and control rather than force. This approach challenged common ideas of what violence looks like. The case drew widespread attention because of its setting and method. Viewers were disturbed by how ordinary routines had been used to cause harm. Experts discussed how isolation and delayed symptoms can disguise serious crimes. The honeymoon detail made the story especially unsettling, turning a symbol of love into one of deception. As legal proceedings began, Isabella's life was no longer defined solely by her death. Reports highlighted her careful nature and future plans, contrasting them with the calculated actions that ended her life. The arrest marked a turning point, shifting the narrative from mystery to accountability and ensuring the crime would face full public examination under the law. The trial revealed the full extent of the planning behind Isabella's murder. Evidence showed that her husband had studied poisons, researched methods to avoid detection, and timed each action with precision. Every aspect of the honeymoon, from the isolated location to the delayed reporting of concern, was part of a calculated strategy. Testimonies and digital records painted a clear picture of intent, leaving little room for doubt. The courtroom followed every detail, from the initial purchases of the poison to the careful administration of small doses that mimicked natural illness. Experts explained how the method relied on trust, patience, and the manipulation of routine, making the crime both chilling and efficient. Throughout the trial, the emotional weight on Isabella's family was palpable. They relived decisions made in the months before the wedding and the final days of the honeymoon. Each revelation deepened their understanding of how carefully the crime had been orchestrated. The evidence left no question that this was not a spontaneous act of rage, but a deliberate, premeditated plan. Media coverage amplified the story, reaching audiences worldwide. The case became an example of how danger can hide behind ordinary appearances. Experts highlighted lessons about trust, deception, and vigilance in personal relationships. Viewers were reminded that even those who seem closest can harbor lethal intentions. The trial's outcome underscored accountability, reinforcing that planning and patience do not excuse crime. Isabella's story, while tragic, also carried a lasting impact. The honeymoon, once meant to celebrate love and union, became a symbol of betrayal and loss. The resort returned to silence, but the lessons of the fatal honeymoon endured. Her life, cut short, continues to warn others about hidden motives and the quiet, calculated nature of true danger, leaving a legacy of vigilance and awareness for all who hear her story.